The guns of the Civil War had gone silent, but in 1866, the battle for American soul began anew. The Union was preserved, slavery abolished, and the Constitution amended to promise liberty for all. Yet, as soldiers returned home and freed men and women sought their place in the nation they helped save, the meaning of freedom itself came under fire. This was a year not of armies but of arguments, not of generals but of politicians. President Andrew Johnson struggled with Congress. Southern states resisted change, and hopes of millions hung in the balance. 1866 was the first chapter in the long and painful story of Reconstruction, America's unfinished revolution. The Civil War had ended less than a year earlier, but peace felt uneasy. More than 600,000 Americans were dead. Cities like Richmond, Atlanta, and Charleston lay in ruins. Millions of homes of former slaves were free, yet destitute, displaced, and uncertain of what freedom would bring. The Union Army remained stationed throughout the South to maintain order. Freedmen's schools began to open, churches sprang up, and families long separated by slavery reunited. But the bitterness lingered. Former Confederates returned home, defeated yet defiant, unwilling to accept that their old world was gone. The country had survived the war, but its moral reconstruction had only begun. After Lincoln's death, Andrew Johnson, a Southern Democrat who remained loyal to the Union, took office. His background was humble. He had risen from poverty and prided himself on being a self-made man. But Johnson's pride often hardened into stubbornness. He despised the wealthy planter class, yet also resented the idea of federal intervention to help freedmen. He believed Southern states should be readmitted to the Union quickly without punishment or sweeping social change. In the first month, Johnson granted amnesty to thousands of former Confederates and allowed Southern legislature to reform with little oversight. It was a decision that would soon ignite a constitutional crisis. By late 1865 and into 1866, Southern legislature passed a series of cruel laws known as the Black Codes. These laws restricted freedom of newly emancipated African Americans, forcing them into labor contracts and punishing them for vagrancy. In Mississippi, black workers could be arrested for leaving a plantation without permission. In South Carolina, they had to pay special taxes just to work outside agriculture. The message was clear: slavery might be gone, but white supremacy would remain. When reports of these injustices reached the North, outrage spread. The nation that had just fought to end slavery now watched its ideals betrayed in peacetime. Congress, dominated by radical Republicans, refused to seat Southern representatives elected under Johnson's lenient terms. They declared the Reconstruction was not yet complete, that liberty without protection was no liberty at all. Leaders like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner demanded stronger federal authority to secure the rights of the freedmen. They saw in early 1866, They saw Johnson as a man clinging to the past, unwilling to fulfill Lincoln's unfinished work. In early 1866, Congress began crafting legislation to define post-war order. and bring it into direct conflict with the president. The Freedmen's Bureau, established in 1865, became the most visible symbol of federal Reconstruction. It provided food, built schools, and arranged labor contracts, and offered a fragile lifeline for millions of newly freed families. When Congress moved to extend and expand the Bureau's power, Johnson vetoed the bill. He argued that it gave the federal government too much authority and unfairly favored African Americans over poor whites. The veto stunned Congress and inflamed public opinion. In response, lawmakers rallied to override the president's decision. The stage was set for a historic showdown, one that would define the meaning of post-war freedom. In March, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, declaring all persons born in the United States, except Native Americans, to be citizens, entitled to equal protection of the laws. It was the first federal law in American history to define citizenship and civil rights. Johnson vetoed it as well. He claimed it was unconstitutional and that Black Americans were not yet prepared for full equality. Congress responded with a fury and overrode the veto. For the first time, a major piece of legislation became law over a president's objections. The victory marked the birth of modern civil rights and the political death knell of Andrew Johnson's presidency. As federal laws changed, Southern resistance turned violent. In Memphis, Tennessee, in May of 1866, white mobs, including police, attacked Black residents, killing dozens, burning homes, and destroying schools. A few months later in New Orleans, a similar massacre occurred when white supremacists assaulted a convention mostly of Black delegates who had gathered to discuss constitutional reform. These atrocities shocked the North and strengthened the radical Republicans' resolve. If freedom could be so easily drowned in blood, they argued, then construction must be enforced by the bayonet if necessary. In June 1866, Congress proposed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. It enshrined the principle of birthright citizenship and guaranteed equal protection under the law. It also barred former Confederate officials from holding office and tied congressional representation to the enfranchisement of freedmen. Johnson opposed it bitterly, urging Southern states to reject it, and they did. But the amendment gave the Union a moral compass for post-war years. For the first time, the Constitution recognized all Americans, regardless of color, as citizens deserving of equal rights. The dream of a new America was being written into law, even as the old one resisted. By the fall of 1866, the country was consumed by political warfare. Johnson took the road on what became known as the Swing Around the Circle, a disastrous speaking tour where he attacked Congress, radical Republicans, and even compared himself to Jesus Christ. This guy was a moron. His coarse language and drunken outbursts horrified audiences. Crowds jeered him openly, and newspapers mocked his behavior. When the midterm elections arrived, voters delivered their verdict, a crushing defeat for Johnson and a sweeping victory for Republicans who gained a two-thirds majority in both houses. The people had spoken, and they demanded a reconstruction that would protect the rights of all citizens, not just restore the old order. As 1866 ended, Americans stood at a crossroads. The bloodshed of war was over, but the war for justice had only begun. The Union was whole again, but unity was fragile. The 14th Amendment awaited ratification. The South seethed with resentment, and freedmen faced violence and poverty, even as they built churches, schools, and communities from nothing. Andrew Johnson, isolated and defiant, had lost the confidence of his party and nation, but in the courage of the freedmen and determination of reformers, the promise of America endured. 1866 was the year the nation began to decide whether victory on the battlefield would become victory in principle. Okay, our flaws. 1866 exposed America's deepest contradictions. The ideals of liberty and equality clashed with the realities of racism and revenge. President Johnson's obstinacy nearly unraveled the progress won through so much sacrifice. The black codes, racial violence, and the slow pace of reform revealed the emancipation alone was not enough. Well, measured in the balance of history, 1866 earns a grade of B. It was a turbulent but necessary year, the painful beginning of a second American Revolution. The passage of Civil Rights Acts and the drafting of the 14th Amendment laid the groundwork for freedom now, as we now take for granted. But the nation's moral courage remained uneven, and the road to equality would be long and bloodstained. Before we get into the closing, Johnson was just an idiot. I mean, this guy was just bad news. It would have been great if Lincoln's successor would have had the same values and the moral compass that Lincoln had, and a lot of this could be avoided. Okay. As we close the year 1866, we see a nation wrestling with its conscience. The cannons were silent, but the struggle for justice was louder than ever. Andrew Johnson's failures remind us that peace without purpose is only a pause between conflicts. Yet in the schools of the Freedmen's Bureau, in the sermons of black preachers, and in the courage of those who refuse to accept half freedom, we find the seeds of America's rebirth. The questions that echoed in 1866 still lingers today. Can a nation found in liberty truly live up to its promise? America was trying, stumbling, bleeding, but trying, and that struggle lay in the hopes for redemption. So that ends 1866. Actually, that ends 90 years, the first 90 years after our Declaration of Independence. So it's just going to get more and more exciting as we move along, because the country had a lot of years with a lot of flaws, but we're still here. We're still the greatest country in the world. And with that, let's end this. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. And I will talk to you on the next podcast.